Your mom is practically a stranger to me, right? Why should I have to take care of her?
My husband yells in front of my mom, who's advanced in dementia. All I want is some cooperation as a family.
It's affecting my work, so I'm moving out starting today. That's okay, right?
He spits out. Does he think I don't know anything? Holding back my inner thoughts, I respond, Sure, that's fine. Now I'm going to put a certain plan into action. I'm Sharon, 50 years old. I'm technically an executive at the company my dad founded, but now I'm caring for my mom at our family home. My husband Neil, 55, works as the COO at the same company. We've been married for 25 years. Our 2 sons left for college and are now working adults, but marriage seems far off for both. My dad, a self-made entrepreneur, worked tirelessly, often sacrificing sleep, but perhaps due to this, he suddenly passed away from a heart attack 20 years ago. The shock was immense, so my mom stepped in as the president, deciding to keep the company afloat. I don't want to let my husband's company go under. I'm a novice and I don't know much about running a business. Please, I need your support, she pleaded with the remaining employees and executives, bowing her head. Eventually, my dad's most trusted executive was appointed vice president, effectively managing the company, with my mom rarely intervening. My husband, 5 years into our marriage at the time, and seen as the potential future president, held the position of COO, but was deemed too inexperienced to take on the president role. He continued to learn under the vice president. Looking back, perhaps my mom didn't fully trust him. Over these 20 years, thanks to the unified efforts of our employees, we've managed to overcome difficult times and keep the company running. While working alongside the regular employees, I was able to send our sons to college. Things seemed to be going well. After my dad's death, even though my mom was only president in name, she faced her share of hardships. Recently, her health and memory have visibly declined. She forgets things like going shopping and buys the same items repeatedly, can't remember what she said just moments ago, and struggles to recall people's names. Who are you? She asked me one day, and I couldn't help but cry. She started to forget even me. The doctor diagnosed her with early-stage dementia. Medication helps her converse normally, but if she forgets to take it, her symptoms worsen, leading to wandering and other mistakes. I left the company to care for my mom, and at the same time we discussed a change in the presidency among the senior employees. It was assumed that my husband would become the president, as my late dad had planned, but there was some disagreement about that within the company. Many employees who had supported the company under the de facto leadership of the vice president for 20 years felt he should become the president. The company wasn't in trouble, and my mom was president in name only. I think the employees respected her as president out of loyalty to my dad. My husband was always serious, his only notable trait, and he became the COO after marrying me, thanks to my dad. Despite this, his ambition was evident, and it didn't sit well with the employees. Still, when we got married, he was regarded as a hardworking and competent employee. To me, who started working at my dad's company right after high school, he was a role model. So when he asked me out and we decided to get married, I was thrilled. But after he became the COO, a likely successor to my dad, he began to change. This change became more apparent after my dad's death. He probably thought he would automatically become the president. But when that didn't happen, his behavior towards my mom turned cold.
You're the president, Mary. You should understand these things. It's troubling if you don't,
he would say, clearly blaming her, even though she left the management to the vice president. Mom, enduring this, Neil, you're still young. There's a lot for you to learn. And so she said, in an attempt to calm my husband. The lives of our employees depend on this. You don't understand that yet. You can't handle the company until you understand the weight of this responsibility. Mom, who had supported my dad and felt the weight of the presidential responsibility, tried to make my husband understand, but his attitude remained unchanged. Things were better when our sons were still at home. But once they left for college and it was just me, Mom, and him, his harsh words only worsened. The young man who once worked so diligently was gone. replaced by someone who lorded over the other employees.
Why isn't that job done yet? If it's late, it's going to be my responsibility,
he bellows, his voice echoing through the company.
But COO, we're swamped with other tasks. We just can't handle more. Please understand.
An employee pleads.
What? Don't talk back. You're useless. You're fired. Fired!
He retorts with a borderline abusive tone. He often takes on more work than the team can handle without proper planning. Instead of assigning tasks properly, a responsibility of his position, he regularly blames the employees, a typical scene at the office. The vice president, unable to ignore this, gently advises,
COO, I understand you're taking on jobs for the company's sake, but without proper planning, work doesn't get done efficiently. You understand, right?
But my husband doesn't take this to heart. Employees express their dissatisfaction, but they speak only to the vice president, probably out of consideration for me and my mom. However, as their discontent grows, it eventually reaches me and Mom. I can't take it anymore. If you want to be president, you need to listen to your employees, I finally tell my husband. Then,
what's wrong with calling useless people useless?
My husband responded. After being confronted by me, he starts avoiding coming home. The rare times he does return, the smell of alcohol and a faint scent of perfume, suggesting another woman, linger on him. So when my mom's dementia became known, he hardly ever came home. He still went to work, apparently commuting from somewhere else. When he finally showed up at home, "Where have you been? I can't take my eyes off Mom. It's really tough. Please, think about us a bit." I confronted him. His reply was cold.
Why should I care about an old Mary? She's practically a stranger to me. How can I be expected to look after an old, useless person?
And he said this right in front of my mom. I'm not asking you to take care of Mom. I just want you to think like a family member. Do you understand? I pleaded.
I married you because you were the president's daughter. What a disaster this turned out to be.
His retort was harsh. Tears welled up in my eyes.
I can't stand looking at your aging Mary anymore, and I'm tired of your lectures. See you,
he said and left the house. Mom's dementia progressed each day, and it was getting harder to slow it down with medication. I was grateful for the nursing care helper who came twice a week. Thank you so much, Mom would occasionally say to me or the helper. I couldn't tell if she was lucid in those moments or not, but it made me happy to see her regain her old kindness, if only briefly. What's this? The nursing care helper noticed a notebook-like object beside Mom's bed. Let me see, I said, taking it from her. It was a heavy leather-bound notebook. Mom slept peacefully. When I hesitantly opened it, I found it was my late dad's journal. His familiar handwriting, strong and honest, reflected his character. I read through the journal, a mix of diary and notes, capturing Dad's feelings about family, the company, failed and successful ventures, and the joy of the business taking off. His writing ended the day before he passed away.
I thought he was capable, so I approved his marriage to my daughter, but I'm disappointed in Neil. He doesn't care about the company. He embezzled company funds and resents me for finding out. Never make him president.
Dad's last words struck me. Mom knew about this. It seemed coincidental that Dad passed away shortly after writing this, but it was clear now that my husband married me aiming for presidency. Surely, Mom must have discussed this with the vice president. Still, as my husband and the father of her beloved grandchildren, Mom likely chose to bear this burden and keep an eye on him herself. I noticed another page with writing. Sharon, I entrust this to you while I still remember. Stop, Neil. It was my mom's handwriting, slightly shaky. In her moments of clarity, she must have wanted to pass this journal to me. Thank you, Mom. I silently expressed my gratitude to her, peacefully sleeping like a child. That's when my second son, Dylan, called.
What? Dad left home? Why?
He was surprised when I told him everything that had happened since they left for college.
I always knew he wasn't too keen on work, but I didn't realize it was this bad.
He sighed. He'd graduated and was working at an IT company, a responsible adult now. I decided to discuss the future with him.
I understand. I'll handle it. Don't worry about Mom,
he assured me confidently. It seemed like just yesterday he was a crying child, but children grow up so fast. Unknowingly, my son had grown to surpass me. I quickly contacted the vice president. I want to discuss the presidential change in front of all employees. Can we arrange it? Please, the vice president agreed, and a week later, an emergency general meeting was scheduled with all the employees. Our small corporation had shares inherited by Mom from my late dad, with the rest divided among the officers, including my husband and me, and all the employees. Now, everything was ready. All that was left was to wait for the day. The day before the meeting, my son came home and tried to talk to Mom.
Grandma, it's me, Dylan. Do you recognize me?
Mom was distant and unresponsive.
Mom, I think Grandma's forgotten me,
he said sadly. Then Mom suddenly murmured, Dad, it's been so long. Welcome home. She seemed to mistake my son for my late father. Indeed, my grown son did bear a resemblance to my father's younger days. It felt like Dad had come back, and I was overwhelmed with emotion, hopeful for tomorrow. Seeing her son, she thought to herself, on the day of the meeting, despite the short notice and being after hours, the company's large conference room was packed with employees. Although we were a small company, with less than 100 employees, the turnout was impressive. My husband, still the COO, sat there, arms crossed, looking down on everyone. His attitude was frankly unpleasant. Mom still held the title of president, but, unable to attend, she had given me her proxy.
Thank you all for gathering despite your busy schedules,
the vice president began.
Let's skip unnecessary talk and get to the point. Shall I continue with the proceedings?
Following his statement, a chorus of agreement rose from the audience.
Then, please proceed,
the vice president said, turning to me to continue speaking. Our current president, due to dementia, cannot continue in her role. I propose a change in presidency. I started. My husband smirked smugly at my words. I propose promoting our current vice president, who has effectively supported the company, to president. This aligns with the wishes of the current president, my mother, I declared. The room erupted in approval.
Objection!
My husband suddenly shouted, silencing the room.
The president is senile, unable to make decisions. What proof do you have?
He mocked. This is it. These are the notes left by the former president, my dad, followed by entries from the current president, my mom. I will share their contents with all of you, I said, holding up my dad's journal.
What?
My husband was speechless. Then, an employee who had long supported the company's accounting spoke up.
I propose an urgent agenda item.
This was all part of the plan.
The COO here ordered me to make unaccounted withdrawals and to cover them up. I demand his dismissal for this.
My husband's face turned pale, clearly not expecting such a revelation here.
Lies! This is nonsense! What proof do you have?
He stammered. Then my son entered the room.
Dylan, why are you here? You're not an employee. You shouldn't be in this meeting.
My husband asked, his voice trembling. My son replied,
I've been given half the shares each from Mom and Grandma, so I have the right to speak here.
Misinterpreting this, my husband regained some boldness.
Great, then support me. I'll hand over the president's position to you eventually.
He pleaded with our son.
Dad, you're in this photo, aren't you?
My son signaled, and an image appeared on the screen through the projector. It showed my husband walking arm in arm with an unknown woman, entering an apartment.
I hired a detective to investigate. It's a shame, finding out my own dad has been doing things like this,
my son said, his voice filled with disappointment.
You've been funding the club this woman runs, right? Even paid for the apartment? I've covered everything.
He continued calmly. At a loss for words, my husband crumbled to his knees. Watching this, the vice president addresses the employees.
Any more comments? If not, let's move to the vote.
My husband remained motionless.
All in favor of the proposed agenda, please raise your hands,
the vice president said. Everyone except my husband raised their hands. Suddenly, my husband looked up.
I tolerated this marriage because you were the president's daughter. and now it's all for nothing. I should never have married you."
He spat out at me. Let him say what he wants. He betrayed not just me, but our entire family. Even our son here must be ashamed to be your child. I thought this to myself, tuning out his cruel words.
"If you want me to leave, fine. I'm better off without this company. We're getting a divorce, and I'm relieved."
With those parting words, my husband left the meeting room.
"Mom, what would you think if I quit my current job and joined this company?"
My son asked me with a smile. I'd be happy to have him back, but I didn't think this company was worth him leaving his IT job. It's sweet of you, but isn't there a more suitable job for your generation? I feel this place is a bit outdated, I said, a bit sadly. That was truly how I felt.
"You're wrong, Mom. There's still demand here, and with the right approach, we can make it more efficient. I don't want to lose the company Grandpa built," he said. His words brought tears to my eyes. "The modern 3D printers are amazing. With programming, we can create models in no time, eliminating the need for lengthy prototyping," he said excitedly. It made me realize how times have changed. It's no longer our era. Let the kids do it their way. They have ideas we could never imagine. I used to think of him as just a child, but when did he grow up so much? Marrying that man was a mistake, but I'm grateful he gave me this son. The worst husband left the best legacy. Sometime later, my husband and I officially divorced. The lawyer handling the divorce said my husband initially refused to pay alimony, claiming he couldn't afford it. However, after the disclosure of the embezzled company funds and payments to his mistress's club and apartment, which coincided with the timing of the apartment purchase, he eventually agreed to pay. He had boasted about funding the mistress's apartment and moved in, but when the money ran out, so did their relationship. He was kicked out, as I heard through the grapevine. He tried to leverage his past connections for a new job, but his embezzlement had become known, and no one would associate with him. Lost credibility is hard to regain. At his age, in his mid-50s, he struggled to find a job and was seen doing traffic control for road construction by one of our employees. Dylan, having joined the company, was bustling around as an idea man, from directing on-site operations to handling sales. A young programmer recommended by him joined the company, infusing new life and energy. Feeling the breath of a new generation, the atmosphere was positive. Then, some wonderful news from Dylan. He wanted to marry his college girlfriend, who had been working at the same company as him. She decided to join our company to support him. She sounds smart, and I'm looking forward to her joining us.
"Once you've written the divorce papers, pack your things quickly and get out of my house," my husband said, sneering provocatively. Beside him, his mistress was dreamily looking around the house. "Wow, all this high-end brand furniture. How lovely. It's a house that fits me perfectly." I felt a twinge at those words and reminded my husband, "Just so you know, I'm taking all my personal things with me on moving day, okay?" Then my husband looked at me as if he was about to burst out laughing. "Of course. If your stuff was left behind, it would just remind me of the miserable days we've had so far." Apparently, he still doesn't understand the true meaning of my words. Just watch. Make sure you don't regret it later. My name is Karen. I'm a 26-year-old interior coordinator. My husband Joseph is 31 and works in the construction industry. We met through our hobby of DIY and have been married for a quick 3 years. At first, we cared for each other, but now I feel grateful we didn't have children. The reason is that Joseph has become too self-indulgent. After coming home, he carelessly takes off his coat, eats the meal I prepared while complaining, doesn't even clean up, and retreats to his room. Before marriage, we made various agreements. One of them was shared household chores, and Joseph and I decided to share them equally. But now I'm taking on almost all the housework. I point out to Joseph that he should do his share of chores, but incredibly, he made this excuse. "Housework is easy, so it's natural for women to do it. Men have to take responsibility for work, so I don't want to do housework." He started to easily throw this rigid opinion at me, which he had never voiced before our marriage. The fact that I earn more than Joseph has also played a big part in him turning against me. But by the time I reach Joseph's age, I'm planning to be independent and should be able to increase my income even more. Perhaps sulking about that, Joseph put only the bare minimum of his earnings into the house without saving and spent it however he liked. He was so reckless with money that I warned him time and time again, but he stubbornly refused to change. "It's my hard-earned money. How greedy can you be to still want more?" Not content with just that, he exaggerated to his coworkers that his wife was an outrageous miser, winning their sympathy. It was Joseph's generosity with money and the perception of domestic unrest that attracted his affair partner, Linda. She's 24 years old, working at Joseph's company as a temporary employee. There are a few young men at my husband's company, and even those a bit older are still considered young. That's probably why 31-year-old Joseph caught her eye. "Poor Joseph. If I had a handsome husband like you, I'd take care of him forever." Believing her words, my husband quickly became infatuated with Linda. I noticed Joseph's infidelity about 6 months ago, just when the affair had begun. One day, an unknown woman called Joseph's mobile phone, and when I searched for her name on social media, I found Linda. "Today's date with my future husband at a fancy restaurant. I'm so nervous since it's my first time." She posted such words along with several photos of a man recognizable as Joseph. I saved all of them and also retrieved their exchanges from Joseph's mobile phone. From the dates, conversations, and information about the places they visited, there was no doubt that he was cheating. When I found out about my husband's infidelity, I was neither angry nor sad. I just felt empty. I understand that getting lectured when coming home tired isn't comfortable, but all those things were necessary for our future. Maybe I was too harsh, but to have an affair just because you're fed up with family after only 3 years? I let out a heavy sigh. Certainly, I can't afford to be down and do nothing. I've been working hard, thinking that compromise was necessary between us, but I simply can't tolerate the cheating. I'm going to divorce him. I started looking for a lawyer to divorce Joseph. 1 month later, on a Saturday, I decided to bring Joseph and Linda together for a discussion. Naturally, they were shocked when I contacted Linda. They probably never thought I would find out about the affair, but perhaps out of joy for the marriage, Linda seemed really thrilled. She neither apologized nor tried to justify the affair to me, and immediately said, "Karen, are you really okay with this unprecedented compensation? I'm so happy." I calmly replied to her, "That's right. Joseph and I decided before our marriage not to divide our assets." At that moment, Linda held hands with Joseph and celebrated. Yes, Joseph and I had talked beforehand, even about what would happen if we ever divorced. In exchange for not dividing the assets, the compensation I would receive was also small. I was working too, so I didn't mind that part, but what made me angry was the complete lack of remorse for the adultery. "How wonderful to live in such a stylish house with you, my love. And all the furniture is from a high-end brand. The appliances are the latest too. It's just the perfect house for me." I felt a strange sensation at those words, and as I handed over the divorce papers, I confirmed something with Joseph. Even during our marriage, there's no division of the things I bought. I'm taking all my personal belongings with me. You do understand that, right? Joseph, seemingly not understanding what I meant, paused for a moment and then spoke. "It's obvious. Your plain clothes and bags wouldn't suit young Linda anyway. I have to buy her better things. If I leave your belongings here, I'll just be a reminder of the painful days we had together." It seems he misunderstood, thinking I was talking about personal belongings as in clothing. Oh well. It's easier to let him continue thinking that than to start a fight. Tomorrow the movers will take everything, so be prepared. The two of them were already ignoring what I was saying, looking around the house's interior. It seems Joseph doesn't understand the meaning of no division of property, but that's none of my concern. Take a good look while you can. Oh, I can't wait for tomorrow's move. The next morning, they came to see me off as if they were hurrying me to leave early. Ignoring them, I was waiting for the moving company's arrival. Then, right on time, a large truck arrived. The workers energetically called out to me. "Thank you for choosing us today. We have another truck waiting nearby, so please don't worry." Linda, with a clouded expression, hesitated as she approached me. Do you have that many personal belongings?" I held back a laugh and barely managed to answer. "The house itself belongs to Joseph, but all the appliances and furniture are mine. That's why I said there will be no division of property, remember?" Hearing that, Joseph rushed to me, his face turning bright red. "All the furniture and appliances are mine. They've been in this house for 3 years. Just take your stuff and get out, quickly." I had reached my limit, and I finally burst out laughing. I had a feeling, but he really didn't understand what no division of property meant. And just because it's been in the house for a few years, it's his. You must be joking. "Hey, you're not really planning to take everything, are you?" Perhaps panicked by my attitude, Joseph lowers his voice to check with me. Meanwhile, the movers were steadily continuing to transport the furniture. "Don't worry. The only memories of living with you, I'll leave behind. Then Joseph, in a panic, ran to the study. I always kept copies of the receipts there, so he must have gone to check which pieces of furniture were being taken, but checking was in vain. There's not a single piece of Joseph's furniture or appliances in this house. Joseph inherited this house from his parents, who owned it as a rental property. Not wanting to spend money on his personal life, he had furnished it all with secondhand furniture and appliances. When we got married, Joseph disposed of all the furniture he had, so I bought all the furniture and appliances. Of course, all were the latest and luxurious famous brand items. Being an interior coordinator by profession, I was quite particular about the design of the furniture and appliances. Moreover, after trial and error, I placed the upscale furniture in visually pleasing arrangements. I think it had an opulence that made it look far from a second-hand house, even if I say so myself. Linda couldn't help but be enchanted as she looked around the room. Meanwhile, Joseph came back with a pale face. By that time, the house was already being cleaned after the removal. Literally, not a speck of dust remained. Linda kept screaming at me, "This is terrible! I can't believe this is happening!" Finally, a worker looked around the house and asked concerned, "The house is empty now. Are you sure this is okay?" "There's no problem since I'm moving out what I bought with my own money. Please deliver it to the address where my parents are in the new house," I said. Then the workers jumped into the truck and drove off briskly. "Hey, I didn't hear about this. What are you going to do?" Linda was still angry, coming at me again. Just then, a car pulled up from behind, and she jumped in alarm. "Wait, who's coming now? What are you plotting?" she yelled. Perhaps she realized I was still up to something. She looked utterly bewildered. "Karen, it's been a while. Is it true you're giving me the wallpaper?" A friend of mine emerged from the car. "That's right, the wallpaper too had been custom made by a designer I met through work, and I paid for it to be completely replaced. So even the wallpaper was my personal property. Since this type was reusable, a bit of maintenance and resizing would allow it to be used again without any problems." You're gonna peel off the wallpaper too?" Linda was staring at me in disbelief, but my friend just shrugged and began to peel off the wallpaper. "Please, can't you at least leave that alone?" My husband pleaded with me, but I ignored him. "If you see my personal belongings I left behind, you'll be reminded of me. And that's unpleasant, right? That's why I decided to give it all to my friend." Having said that himself, he couldn't correct it, and he was confused and panicked. Generally, if you replace all the wallpaper in a house, it costs at least $5,000. Since they have to buy new furniture as well, it's undoubtedly a painful expense for them. I had all the tasteful furniture and appliances removed without leaving a single piece, and even the wallpaper was peeled off. Now the house looks older than its actual age. To live a sweet life in a room that looked good before the contractors came in. For the two of them, who had such a dream, it must be an unbearable reality. They seemed to have no energy left to complain to me, and Joseph and Linda were dumbfounded. After seeing off my friend with a smile as she collected the wallpaper, I got in the car. "Well, this is goodbye. Farewell." I casually bid farewell to the two of them and left the empty house behind. Afterwards, I used the furniture and appliances in my new home, but I soon got sick of the fact that Joseph had used them and called a friend who was a buyer to sell them. Fortunately, they were in very good condition, and I was able to sell them for a higher price than expected. What kind of furniture should I buy next? Where should I place them? As I was thinking about these things, I got a call from Joseph after a long time. "Linda just won't stop going on about having you arrange the furniture. Come to the house once." I didn't want to meet them, and it troubled me a lot, but my interest as an interior coordinator won out. What kind of furniture had those two bought? What kind of interior design did they want? "All right, I'll go just to hear what you have to say." I found myself agreeing. "Really? Remember, you promised," Joseph exclaimed with apparent joy before hanging up. On the promised day, I arrived at their place and was shocked at what I saw. They hadn't even re-wallpapered, and as for the furniture and appliances, it was all obviously secondhand stuff gathered from used goods stores. It looked exactly like a cheap apartment where a student might live. A whole month had passed since we parted ways, and this was just too much. Wait, what is this? This is beyond an interior design problem. I was at a loss for words. Linda took this as an insult and exploded in anger. "We gathered this stuff just to live for now. We'll replace it soon. Since you took everything, use your connections or whatever, and make this a house we can brag about to our friends." She seemed to be very unhappy with a life surrounded by secondhand furniture and appliances. She was irritated throughout our conversation. Even asking for the budget, it wasn't enough for my fee. "What's this? You're a talented coordinator, but you can't do this? You're useless." Facing Linda's indignation, I was dumbfounded and explained. "Any coordinator, no matter how skilled, can't do much with such a limited budget. This is ridiculous and way beyond connections. She seemed serious about having me arrange high-end brand furniture and appliances on such a tight budget. Linda, now entirely frustrated, finally began to explode in anger. What? Ridiculous. Did you come here just to look down on me? If you don't like it, I'll leave, but if you want to furnish your home on that budget, you should at least polish your interior sense. You really are making fun of me. But just because you have a slightly fashionable job, don't get so overconfident. Hey, stop it. Joseph tries to calm Linda down with a weary look on his face. Joseph, say something to her. Just stop it, both of you. Linda, please be quiet. I'm sorry for the noise. After everything, I had to marry Linda. But as you can see, she's angry all the time, and it's tough every day. Apparently after I left, they had a big fight in the now empty house, but since Linda had already quit her job to get married and had reported the marriage to her parents, she had nowhere to go. Joseph confessed that he married Linda solely out of compromise so she would take care of the housework. But such a marriage was bound to fail, and thus he had given up so soon. Please, Karen, help me fix our relationship again, begged Joseph. I responded, clearly annoyed. What's this? Planning to cheat on me next? No, the thing with Linda was just temporary. Confusion. After you left, I realized that there's no one more wonderful than you, Karen. You're not serious, are you? I suddenly realized I had raised my voice. You're the one who told me to get out of this house, right? I divorced you, just like you wanted. You can't possibly expect me to change my mind now. Please, Karen, don't call me by my first name so casually. This rundown house is your chosen castle with your affair partner. You two should get along together. Wait, Karen. Ignoring Joseph's pleas, I quickly left the house. It's not worth satisfying curiosity by looking into someone else's downfall. What a life lesson, I thought to myself. Later on, I heard that Joseph and Linda begged their parents to help with the cost of purchasing furniture and appliances, but they were apparently disowned by both sets of parents. No one would help with buying furniture and appliances, let alone forgive them for marrying after an affair. So they reluctantly continued to live in that second-hand house. I can't even muster any sympathy for them anymore. It's the result of their actions. As for me, I recently met a male interior designer through work. Lately, on weekends, we've been going out together quite often. I've been cautious about dating men for a while, but maybe it's time to think about starting a new life. With those thoughts in mind, I'm off on another date today.
Ivana, what are you doing here? I had just returned from shopping when I saw a figure standing frozen at the front door. I was so taken aback that I dropped my shopping bags. What about your honeymoon? I came back alone. Upon hearing this, Ivana started to cry. I am Emily, a 58-year-old housewife. My husband is Oswald, who is 60 years old. And this is about my daughter Ivana, who was supposed to be on her honeymoon, but was inexplicably standing at our front door with her suitcase. Hold on, I am totally lost here. For now, I let Ivana inside the house to hear the details. I placed Ivana's pink suitcase by the entrance and ushered her, still sobbing, into the living room. I then set a glass of iced tea on the dining table. Ivana began to sip it cautiously. I slowly began to ask questions, trying to piece the situation together. So, you came back from Hawaii all alone? Yes. She was supposed to be in Hawaii for her honeymoon, just 2 days ago. Why exactly? I am familiar with her husband Lloyd. He's a courteous man, and as far as I know, he has a significant role in a major company. He seemed very promising, like someone who could provide a stable life. That's why we celebrated their marriage. As Ivana began to speak, I learned a shocking truth. There was another woman there. Excuse me? On their honeymoon? A woman? My voice cracked in disbelief. So we ended up spending time together, all 3 of us. Wait, what? A honeymoon with 3 people? And a woman you didn't even know? Just hearing that made my blood boil. I pulled out my mobile phone, quickly found Lloyd's contact, and hit the call button. Wait, Mom. Ivana tries to stop me with a weak voice, but I totally ignore her. How dare he do this to my Ivana? Unforgivable. My hand holding the phone trembles. After about 3 rings, Lloyd picks up. Hold on, what's the meaning of this? You're hanging out with another woman? I started ranting without even waiting for Lloyd's response. Then, in an extremely bored tone, she's my sister, my actual sister. What are you misunderstanding? What? His actual sister? I don't know where to direct my gaze. Ivana has her head down too. Sister? Your real sister? Yes. There is nothing shady going on. She's the sister who lives in Hawaii and couldn't make it to the wedding because her kid had an ear infection. Oh. So, I have a question too. I can't reach Ivana, since you seem to know what's going on here. Is she back with you? While saying this, Lloyd lets out a sigh on the other end of the phone. Women really go off the handle so easily, making a fuss and then fly all the way back to Boston on a whim. Is it the female hormones that make you act so irrationally? Even if I got it a bit wrong, there is no need for that kind of language. That comment was totally insensitive toward women. I am getting pretty steamed. The one who acted on emotion and left is your Ivana. I will be staying in Hawaii as planned for a week. When I get back, I expect a full apology. Please let Ivana know that's the plan. With that, Lloyd hung up abruptly. I really can't wrap my head around the situation. Yeah, me neither, but Mom, you kind of jumped the gun with that phone call before we could get the full story. According to Ivana's explanation, as soon as they arrived in Hawaii, it seems Lloyd's real sister was waiting for them at the hotel. Lloyd told me, so my sister will put you through some special training to see if you're worthy of being my partner. I've never heard of a honeymoon where the groom's sister tags along to give lessons in housekeeping. What? We never talked about this. I wanted to visit the beautiful beaches and Mauna Kea mountain. When Ivana stammered this out, that's your problem, isn't it? Ivana felt emotionally shut out. But you said you wanted to go too. Once my sister's special training is over, we can go wherever we like. Of course, all 3 of us. The reason we chose Hawaii, where my sister lives, is precisely for this. Then a woman named Sanaya, the sister, said, Enough talk. From today, I will be giving you an intense homemaking course. I've been doing this for years. As both a wife and a mom, I want to go all out to help my brother's marriage. Off to my house we go. So it seems this mysterious training started unfolding. So, what happened once you got to his sister's house? I found myself parched. I poured more iced tea into my empty glass to encourage the storytelling. Even though Lloyd is usually serious, it was clear from that phone call that he looked down on women, and Ivana as well. Turning a honeymoon into a housekeeping training camp? Hearing this almost made me want to throw my iced tea in anger. Go on. Ivana continues the story haltingly. The house they were driven to, Sanaya's home, was cluttered with children's toys. First lesson in housekeeping cleaning. Apparently, she was told to clean the scattered toys. Next is the shower room, and also the toilet. While Ivana was doing the work, Sanaya, claiming to be supervising her housekeeping skills, was spending time with Lloyd in the living room. Isn't this basically using your partner for menial tasks under the guise of visiting home?
Doesn't it feel like harassment? When I pressed for more details. That's not all. Fresh tears streamed down from Ivana's eyes. They told me to make dinner for Sanaya's family of 4 plus the 2 of us. Just using what was in the fridge. I've never cooked for 6 people before. I thought I would learn how to cook as we went along in our marriage. I couldn't even come up with a menu. Ivana's ordeal continued. So I found some eggplant in the fridge and tried to look up recipes on a cooking community website on my phone. Then Sanaya said, "You should be able to cook by eye. Using your phone is unacceptable." She took my phone away and said, "This is a failure. I'm going to need to give you some intensive training. We're changing all our vacation plans to stay at our house." The entire vacation? Even one day would be ridiculous, but the whole vacation. So that was it. Apparently, she took back her phone and returned home, sobbing. What even is this? Ivana was really looking forward to their honeymoon. The hotel had a sparkling pool and a view of the beautiful ocean. They must have been excited to try poke balls and Hawaiian plate lunches. But Lloyd and Sanaya trampled over those dreams so easily. Then, Ivana, tears streaming down her face, brought up a suggestion. Interesting. Sounds like a plan. I decided to support Ivana with all my might. As soon as the honeymoon was over, Ivana received a call from Lloyd. "We're coming over tomorrow to discuss how we're going to live from now on." When Ivana asked, "What do you mean by how we're going to live?" "You failed as Lloyd's partner, so we need to discuss what's next. Seth said you're a total failure in the kitchen. We need to talk specifics. Seth is coming with me. So listen carefully and think about where you went wrong." What? Reflect on my actions? I was about to explode with anger at that arrogant and unreasonable demand. But them coming over actually works in my favor. I decided to handle this calmly. Finally, the day of the confrontation arrived, and Sanaya and Lloyd showed up. "Well, Ivana, done any reflecting?" Lloyd starts off with arrogance right away. The serious demeanor he had during our first meeting seemed to have flown away. "For now, please, come in." I led the 2 of them into the living room. "Now, let's start the Ivana's partner test." I called out loudly for my husband, who was waiting in the other room. "All right." My husband walks in holding a yoga mat, a confident smile on his face. "Gotta keep in shape to protect the family. First, we're going to work on our core and back muscles." My husband has recently become concerned with aging and started going to the gym. With thrice weekly workouts guided by a personal trainer, he's got a solid chest, even at 60. "Alright, we're doing push-ups on this mat. It's a competition. Lower yourself down for 3 seconds, count slowly, and then push back up. That's 1 rep. If you don't stay down for 3 seconds, you won't engage your core muscles." Lloyd, who appears to have never worked out a day in his life, is utterly shocked. If you're saying Ivana needs a Lloyd's partner test, then I'm going to test if you're fit to be Ivana's partner. Keeping in shape is important for family support and child rearing too. Now, place your hands slightly wider than shoulder width apart and get into a push-up position. Come on, hurry up. It felt like boot camp, as if a merciless drill sergeant was waiting to put Lloyd through the ringer. Both my husband and Lloyd assumed the push-up position. And 1. At that moment, Lloyd collapses onto the floor and can't get back up. He's stuck to the floor like a squashed frog. "Ha ha ha, you can't do it. I can do 50, you know." My husband is breezily doing push-ups beside him. His glasses are askew, his tie is crooked. Lloyd remains collapsed. Alright, you're next. I turned to Sanaya, who was standing there, dumbfounded. What? Me too? Now it's Sanaya's turn to be surprised. You seem to be fond of my Ivana. I will be the judge of whether you have the ability as a mom and a wife, and whether you're fit to guide my Ivana. Yes, this was the retaliation plan that Ivana had suggested to me. Sanaya's home had mold growing in the shower, and her toys were just pushed to the side. She wasn't exactly in a position to teach me how to clean. Based on what Ivana told me, I had formulated a plan. Then, I forcefully pulled Sanaya into the living room. I've lifted dirty just for you. This is your test. Now, start cleaning. Sanaya tried to deflect, saying, I came here for discussion from Hawaii. Huh? Didn't you make Ivana do chores under the guise of guidance and steal her leisure time? Well, I'm just returning the favor. Clean up quickly and call me when you're done. The next test awaits. I go back to the living room and make some good tea. I hand a cup to Ivana, who's quietly watching the plan unfold, and we both sit on the sofa. Meanwhile, Lloyd is struggling with his workout and getting berated by my husband. His neatly styled hair is now a mess. After a while, Sanaya returns to the living room. I've finished cleaning. Oh, that was quick, she says, peeking into the bathroom. It had taken her nearly an hour, so she must have done a decent job. At first glance, it looks clean, but there are clear traces of water streaks on the walls. If you don't wipe the water off shiny surfaces immediately, they'll get cloudy. Don't you even know that? Especially the mirror. It will get those white water stains. And you dare call yourself Ivana's mentor? I gave it to her, holding nothing back. Sanaya tried to make an excuse, saying, there is no mirror in my home's shower room. Well, I've heard from Ivana, who cleaned your house, that there indeed was a mirror. I quickly shot back. And she said there was also a lot of black mold. Clearly, you've been neglecting it. Sanaya was left without a comeback, but I couldn't let her off the hook that easily. Alright, next up is sewing. Get to the sewing machine. What? Just as she thought she could relax after cleaning, another task was upon her. A sewing machine is a must, isn't it? I've heard your child is still small, but it's a given. I grinned as I picked up some leftover quilted fabric from when I made Ivana's lunch bag ages ago. Sanaya and I headed to the craft room upstairs. Peeking into the living room, I saw Lloyd was still getting a serious workout. He might even pull a muscle or something. You'll make a simple bag with this fabric? I've already done the cutting for you. Aren't I kind? A sewing machine, you say? You're not going to tell me you've never used one, are you? You can do all sorts of housework, right? I took Sanaya's hand and made her sit in front of the sewing machine. I, don't know how to thread it. Sanaya looked down, clearly uncomfortable. Excuse me? So, about threading the machine. What? What? I can't thread it. I looked down at Sanaya, who was frozen in front of the sewing machine, and chuckled in disbelief. You claim to be a mentor, but you don't even know this. Ivana, come here. I called to Ivana downstairs. Coming! Ivana arrives. This lady here, she doesn't know the first thing about sewing. As I smirked, oh dear, Sanaya, like this. Ivana threaded the machine for her. Sanaya's face turned beet red, as if she couldn't bear the humiliation. Now, go ahead. Surrounded by the two of us, Sanaya started the sewing machine. Clatter, clatter, clatter. The stitching was all over the place. Pfft! I couldn't help but burst out laughing at her poor attempt. Ivana was also holding back a laugh, looking down. Some stitches were too deep, and others weren't aligned at all. Ivana, show her how it's done, will you? Sure, but usually you should do a securing stitch at the edge first. Well, it can't be helped, can it? She started sewing without any know-how. Our so-called leader here knows nothing. Ivana skillfully operated the sewing machine, stitching it straight. Having loved sewing from a young age and being in the sewing club through middle and high school, this was a piece of cake for Ivana. Watching that, Sanaya grumbled, "You can just pay someone at a craft store to sew a bag for you." Really? Then what's the difference between outsourcing your sewing to a craft store and replacing your lack of cooking skills with supermarket pre-made meals? There are things you can do that Ivana can't, and vice versa. Stop making excuses and picking and choosing to suit your convenience. I said just that and headed down to the living room. On the first floor, Lloyd was still sprawled on the floor. It looked like he couldn't even get up anymore. Beside me, my husband was striking some sort of muscle pause. "All right, let's have a talk. All of us." Still trembling with humiliation, Sanaya managed to take a seat on the sofa, along with Lloyd, who had somehow managed to get up. Ivana, my husband, and I sat across from them. "First, take a look at this." I laid out the sewing pieces from both Sanaya and Ivana on the table for everyone to see and compare. It's downright hilarious that someone who can only produce something this shoddy would act like they're in charge. Lloyd stared at his sister's wobbly stitching, completely stunned. That said it all. Sanaya was at loss for words, her hands trembling. "This one's a mess too. Unbelievable that they only had Ivana do the special training." This time, it was Dad who laid into Lloyd. "You've been going on about women, but we really have to question how you're doing as a man yourself," I added, driving the point home. Okay, this is probably a good place to stop. That's right, I remembered something Ivana and I had agreed upon that day. "Ivana, go ahead and bring it out." Ivana presented some documents. "It's not a quick divorce or anything, but I just can't go on with you anymore. I'm glad I realized it sooner rather than later." Ivana stated it firmly. "What?" Their voices of surprise came out in unison. Both widened their eyes, flustered and mouths moving, but no words coming out. "Hold on, I was thinking of forgiving you as long as you showed some remorse." Finally, Lloyd spoke up. "Sure, I can't cook, but that's not something I need to be sorry about. Devoting all our honeymoon to training and bringing in Sanaya, it's all just too absurd. I can't be with you anymore." Ivana started signing the papers with a pen. "Wait, so it's my fault that you're getting a divorce? All I did was point out your flaws." Now it was Sanaya's turn to panic. Ivana shook her head. "I never said I can't cook. I was planning on learning eventually. Besides," she paused for a moment, "just like I have things I can and cannot do, so does Sanaya. Judging that solely based on your own convenience and standards is wrong," she said, setting the record straight. I went in for the kill too. "You can't even sew or clean, acting all high and mighty. Plus, you ruined the honeymoon and treated Ivana like a servant. I am too embarrassed to be related to you. Just sign the divorce papers and get out." And so, Ivana came back to our home. Sanaya got divorced because she was terrible at housekeeping. How dare she continuously harass Ivana, claiming to be some sort of mom or Lloyd's partner without even considering her own flaws? This is what we call personal responsibility. Meanwhile, Lloyd kept making mistakes at work due to his inconsiderate personality. He even said something insensitive to a female coworker like, These documents are a mess. Are you not in the mood to work just because you're feeling unwell? He faced severe disciplinary action and was suspended from work. Would you come back? If you reflect on this, I believe we can start over. And I feel like I could even get my position back at work. It seems like Ivana kept getting messages from Lloyd pressuring her to get back together, despite showing no signs of remorse. That's not gonna happen. I'm getting married. With that, she promptly cut off communication. Yes, Ivana is set to remarry in 6 months. Her new partner is also a businessman, similar to before, but much more easygoing. He's into ab rolling and has a fit physique. As long as I can eat, I'm good. When they dine together, they get excited talking about things like protein for bodybuilding. Ivana, who's now seriously learning to cook, joins her in the kitchen. I mean, I could at least make scrambled eggs. While making sandwiches for work, Ivana recalls those days. It's okay, don't worry about it. You'll get the hang of it as you go along. With that, I seasoned the dish just by eyeballing it.
I'm Olive, 35 years old. Since graduating from college, I've worked as an office clerk in the fashion industry. I've always been committed to my job, and it's been like my romantic partner. I climbed the corporate ladder quite smoothly because I love what I do. However, working in a predominantly female company meant fewer chances to meet someone, so my love life was rather limited. Once I hit 30 and saw everyone around me getting married and having kids, I decided to sign up for a dating service. That's how I met George. From the first date, George was laid back and easygoing, the total opposite of me, who's always in a hurry and rather impatient. At times, I thought he was a bit unreliable, but then I realized that's something I can handle. I decided that George could fill the gap where I lack easygoingness and chose to marry him. George was raised by a single mother, but neither he nor his mom were interested in living together after we got married. The often told tales of mother-in-law and daughter-in-law conflicts had me relieved that neither of us wanted to live together. When I met my mother-in-law for the first time before our wedding, she seemed to be sizing me up with a critical stare. That confirmed my feelings that I didn't want to share a home with her. No living with my mother-in-law, and a new chapter begins with George as a married couple. We'll make compromises even when our values clash. That was my resolve. So, a month into our adjusted married life, something completely unexpected happened. Hello, Olive. How are you? Still no baby? I want to see my grandchild already. Hi, mother-in-law. It's been a while. What brings you here? What's in the bag? Oh, didn't George tell you? I've decided to move in. What? Of course, George had never mentioned any such plans to me. Both he and his mom had told me before our marriage that neither of them was interested in living together. So this was a complete curveball. Hey, mother-in-law's here at the house. She says she's moving in? What's going on? What? Mom did mention feeling lonely, but I never heard anything about moving in. I mean, I told her it was okay if she felt too lonely, but living together? I hid away to make the call, and when George said that, I unintentionally let out a "What?" Why did you say it was okay to live together without discussing it with me? She probably got the wrong idea. Aren't these the kind of decisions we should be making together? Well, I thought having Mom around to help with chores might be nice. When I had greeted her at her home, the last thing I felt was that she could handle household chores. The kitchen was coated in dust, clearly untouched for a while, and the whole house was cluttered. It was nowhere near what you'd call neat. I want to enjoy my lunch, so I'm gonna hang up now, he said, and abruptly ended the call. Just as I was getting used to life with George, the idea of adding mother-in-law to the equation was overwhelming. While I stood there in disbelief, my mother-in-law called me over, looking annoyed. Olive, your stuff is in the way. Move it already, will you? Honestly, you can't raise a kid in such a cramped house. Well, George and I have decided not to have kids. I'm 35 and George is 38. Having a baby past 35 is considered high risk, and I wanted to focus on my career. So we had agreed before marriage to live a peaceful life, just the two of us. I said that mainly to keep my mother-in-law at bay, so we wouldn't have to face daily nagging about grandchildren. But my words set off mother-in-law like a firecracker. Her face turned beet red with anger. Why? I can't believe you're married and not planning to have kids. I raised George all by myself, and you say you want to live a spoiled life? I respect that you raised George while working, but we've decided. I don't want to hear your excuses. You're the worst daughter-in-law. My attempt at pacifying mother-in-law had spectacularly backfired. She stayed furious and spent the next while berating me, not even allowing me room to defend myself. Hey, I can't live with mother-in-law. She's been making a big fuss about wanting grandkids again today. After George came home, I discreetly talked to him about the day's events in our bedroom. George, however, was only half listening, mostly engrossed in his smartphone, offering occasional disinterested replies like, really? Eventually, he put his phone down, got into bed, and closed his eyes. George, are you even listening? I was listening, but Mom's lonely, so what can you do? I owe her for raising me as a single mother. I want to repay her kindness. So, Olive, you'll have to put up with it for a bit. My annoyance flared up at George, who, claiming he was tired from work, quickly drifted off to sleep. I was frustrated firstly with having to pacify my mother-in-law who's been going on and on about wanting grandkids, and secondly with George for unilaterally deciding we'd live with his mom. I'd heard that marriages are built on compromise. I knew families successfully managed to live with in-laws. Day one was a disaster, but to continue my life with George, it looked like I'd have to be the one making sacrifices. Waking George up to vent my anger was out of the question, so I accepted our living situation. Later, I'd realized this choice was a mistake. I often found myself wishing I'd shaken George awake that night, given him an ultimatum between his mom and me. Because the next day, mother-in-law's harassment began. Olive, just because you work doesn't mean you can slack on housework. George and I are starving, so hurry up and make dinner. Okay. When I got home from work, George had already returned and was watching TV with mother-in-law in the living room. George isn't someone who can't cook. Before, if I came home late, he would have dinner ready for me. Yet today, for some reason, he'd done nothing. Even the dishes from the morning were still in the sink. He seemed to be enjoying a quiz show with mother-in-law while I was left to prepare dinner alone in the kitchen. When I finally laid out the meal on the table, mother-in-law twisted her lips in disapproval again. What's this? Mostly frozen food, huh? You think it's okay to feed this additive packed stuff to an elderly person? I'm sorry, I've been busy with work. Being busy with work is no excuse. Has George been eating like this every day since you got married? Poor guy. If his health goes south, it's on you. While mother-in-law angrily scolds me, spitting as she speaks, George quietly eats his meal. George, who side glances at the TV and seems to be enjoying himself while his wife is being yelled at by mother-in-law, doesn't seem like the George I know. Throughout dinner, mother-in-law never stopped complaining at me. A wife who can't even cook and won't have kids is the worst. George could have done so much better. Prioritize George and me over your job. She kept going on and on until I was so mentally worn down I couldn't even understand what she was saying anymore. That night, I broke down crying in our bedroom. The thought of this life continuing was unbearable. George seemed surprised to see me cry. I told him I can't live with mother-in-law anymore, but George looked exasperated. My mom is important to me, so I want you to treat her with respect too, he said before falling asleep. I couldn't even muster a rebuttal to George and cried until I fell asleep. Life with mother-in-law, filled with nothing but suffering, continued as it was. George doesn't have to do a thing. Housework is a wife's job. Once mother-in-law said this, George truly stopped doing any chores. I continued to juggle work, household tasks, and being yelled at by mother-in-law. When mother-in-law found out George and I had separate finances, she started demanding money from me. "You're my son's wife, so giving me an allowance is your natural duty." She demanded money with this ridiculous reasoning. I was so tired of being yelled at that I just gave her the money, thinking if it could be solved with cash, so be it. My home no longer felt like a place to relax. When heading back home after work, my feet felt as heavy as lead. I spent days wondering how long this life would continue, feeling utterly hopeless. Then, a pivotal incident occurred. "I'm home. What's going on?" "Come here for a second." I arrived home that day, burdened with yet more emotional stress. Waiting for me at the entrance was George, his face twisted in anger. George, who had greeted me at the entrance, pulls me into the living room. There, sitting on the sofa, mother-in-law looked downcast. "Did something happen?" "This is all Olive's fault, isn't it? You must have done something." It was the first time I had ever seen George angry. Although I was shocked, I racked my brain. I had no recollection of doing anything to make mother-in-law feel this way. Feeling agitated, George finally told me what was bothering him. "I heard you've been making snide remarks to my mom every day when I'm not around. She even told me you only cook when I'm here, so she's not getting meals. What's your aim in being nasty to my mom?" I was dumbfounded and couldn't speak. George had fallen for the lies mother-in-law had fed him. It was mother-in-law who had been making snide comments when George wasn't around, even complaining about the food like, "Isn't this too salty? It looks awful." Yet I had never stopped serving meals. I was certain I had fulfilled all of mother-in-law's demands. "I haven't done any of that. I cook even when you're not here, and I've never made any nasty comments." "Stop lying." As George scolded me, mother-in-law looked over his shoulder at me and grinned slyly. George had decided that I was lying and took mother-in-law's words as truth. Looking at George like this made me feel like my head would explode. Maybe this is what people mean when they say they've woken up. As George continued to rage, he snapped at me. "Get out! Go back to your parents' home and reflect on yourself." "Sure, I'll reflect." I really had to reflect. I had to reflect on why I had been wearing myself thin, serving people like this. I quietly packed my things and left the house. When I got to my parents' house and explained the situation, they were shocked at my appearance. I hadn't realized it, but the stress from living with mother-in-law had caused me to lose a significant amount of weight. Holding me in her arms, my mom cried, "I wish I had never approved of this marriage." My dad said, "You don't ever have to go back." Luckily, my parents' home was a commutable distance to my job, so I took them up on their offer and started my life afresh at their house. Every now and then, I'd get an email from George checking in on me, but I left them all unread. As I worked hard and relaxed at my parents' home, I felt like I was breaking free from the brainwashing. I used to think that to keep my marriage to George, I had to endure whatever mother-in-law said. But a marriage with a husband who prioritizes his mother over his wife is not worth keeping. It took quite some time before I could look back and laugh at what a fool I'd been. "Have you cooled your head yet?" "Yes, I feel much clearer now. Thanks for sending me back to my parents." Months passed, and I returned to the house where George and mother-in-law lived. George was waiting at the front door. I smiled and headed toward the living room. Mother-in-law was seated, glaring at me as I entered. "You're late! Being away this long is unacceptable for a wife. You owe George and me an apology for what you've done and for leaving this house unattended." Mother-in-law spoke loudly, and George agreed as he sat next to her. Without sitting down, I pulled out some documents from my bag. I won't apologize. However, I don't want to make either of you uncomfortable anymore, so I've prepared this. Both George and mother-in-law's eyes widened when they saw the papers I placed on the table. The document was a pre-filled divorce application. Divorce? Hold on, Olive. I never thought about divorcing if you just apologized to my mom. Don't get it twisted. I'm the one who wants to divorce. I'm tired of being yelled at by mother-in-law every day and being treated like a maid. I thought I was doing it all for you, George, but it seems you care more about your mom than me. I don't see the need to value someone who doesn't value me. I realized that after clearing my head at my parents' house. I expected George to be shaken. However, I was surprised to see mother-in-law trembling as well. Now, Olive, calm down. Divorcing is a hasty decision. Maybe I've been harsh on you, but it's not that I hate you. I just wanted you to become a respectable wife. I don't want to become a respectable wife as you see it, so thanks, but no thanks. What's making you so nervous? Is it because you had a hard time without your free and limited housemaid for these few months? Mother-in-law couldn't argue with my statement. The house I'd kept clean despite all of mother-in-law's criticisms was a mess after just a few months of my absence. Clearly, housekeeping wasn't mother-in-law's strong suit. I came here today to deliver the divorce papers. If you're not willing to agree to the divorce, I've decided to consult a lawyer. Please mail it back as soon as you've signed. Goodbye. I left George and mother-in-law, both looking pale and downcast, and walked out of the house. Finally saying what I needed to say, I felt refreshed as I headed back to my parents' home. Shortly after, George promptly mailed me the completed divorce papers. I easily got my divorce and returned to a life where work is my primary relationship. I'm truly happy living life on my own terms now. As for George and mother-in-law, they seem to be living quietly in their dust-filled home. When I told the matchmaker who had set us up about our divorce, I was shocked to hear that George had re-registered with the dating service. He's apparently looking for a new housekeeper, but given his age and divorce history, his search for a life partner isn't going well. I had resigned myself to staying single forever after the ordeal, but recently a younger colleague told me he's interested in dating with marriage in mind. I'm unsure what to respond, but the truth is, I'm growing fond of this adorable, puppy-like person. We're in the stage of going on dates, and I have a feeling I'll end up being swept off my feet by this colleague. Here's hoping this marriage works out better than the last.
Hey, what's wrong, Jake? Mom, I might be done for. Our son Jake was hanging his head at the entrance as soon as he got home. My husband and I were shocked by the scene. We decided to take him to the living room and ask what was going on. He seemed to come alone today. I wondered where his wife Laura was. But the reason Laura was absent became clear when we heard his story. After a while, Jake regained his composure. My husband and I waited for Jake to speak. Sorry for coming home so suddenly. I just can't take it anymore. What happened? And Jake, have you lost some weight? Yeah. He was always thin, but now he looked sickly thin. It wasn't normal. Then Jake revealed the reason behind it. Actually, it's because of Laura. Laura? What happened? Right now, she's taking most of my salary. What? Most of your salary? Is Laura handling the finances? Yeah. You know I've always been bad with money, right? So I thought it would be better if Laura managed it. But recently, the money she's been giving me has been decreasing, and I can't afford lunch. Then she said she's been saving money because the electricity bill was high this month, and that she had to use the money to repair the vacuum cleaner. I couldn't stand it anymore and complained, but she said it's my fault for not earning enough. I see. Jake, you're pathetic. So you're saying you've been doing whatever Laura tells you? If you're the man of the house, you need to take control. If not, the situation might get worse. I know. What my husband said was true. If you just follow your wife's orders, it can lead to misery. Although it might be harsh for Jake, who's mentally weak right now, he has to understand it. Jake seemed to understand as he was silently nodding. Then, Jake told us something else. Remember you said I looked thinner? It might be because I've been surviving on instant noodles for all 3 meals. You can't eat only instant noodles. No matter how convenient it is, you need to get proper nutrition. But all I'm given is instant noodles. It seems like Jake has been given only a small amount of money for the last month, and has been provided only with instant noodles for lunch. Ever since Laura suggested they needed to save money, Jake has been putting up with it. Of course, he tried to object, but the fact is that he was the one who asked Laura to manage the finances. It might be difficult for him to complain, given those circumstances. But, considering the situation, he can't dwell on that right now. Anyway, you're staying with us tonight. I'll give you a proper meal and even pack a lunch for work tomorrow. Thank you, Mom. With a sigh of relief, Jake, with tears streaming down his face, thanked me. Apparently, he told Laura he'd be staying at his parents' home for a while. In hindsight, it would have been better if he had confronted her about the difficulties of their current living situation. But given Jake's mental state, that was all he could say to her. It was my first time seeing Jake so broken down. I can't even begin to imagine the amount of stress he must have been under. After that, he ended up staying at home for a while, and due to his poor health, he had to take a leave of absence from work. When Jake took this leave, I learned that he had recently been going to the hospital. He said it was due to stress, so the hospital had advised him to take some time off. However, Jake had a fear of what she might do to him if he took a break from work, so he had continued working out of habit, which resulted in his current state. During Jake's leave of absence, he was living on disability. At least being at home meant he could save on meals, which he said would be a big help. But what's more important is that we still need to do something about Laura. However, there is something I'm worried about. If I get involved, it could potentially make things worse. Maybe they can resolve it by themselves. For a moment, the thought crossed my mind that it might not be good for me to intervene. But I quickly dismissed such thoughts. Jake was desperate enough to come to me in such a state, and it's not a situation where I could afford to hesitate. I should do what I can for Jake. Just then, I received a call from Laura. Hello, Laura? It's been a while, hasn't it, Isabella? Jake's there with you, isn't he? Could you tell him to come home? I'm sorry, but I can't do that. Why not? Jake is trying to abandon his duties as a husband, you know? Are you really okay with that? I don't think it's a matter of me being okay with it or not. If I just send him back, I don't think it will solve anything fundamentally. How about we set up a meeting to talk about this in the near future? And not just with me, but with your parents as well, so we could all sit down and discuss this. Oh, is that so? I see. So, you're not planning on sending Jake back, are you? Understood. I have some ideas too then. We'll talk again soon. With that, Laura hung up the phone. She has some ideas. That phrase stuck with me. What could Laura possibly be planning? Several anxiety-filled days passed. Then, one weekend, my husband Jake and I were relaxing when the doorbell rang. I thought it was the mail or something and checked the intercom monitor. I couldn't believe my eyes. There were Laura and her parents. What should I do? Luckily, Jake hasn't noticed yet. Maybe I can dodge the situation and pretend we're not home. That's what I was thinking. But then I heard, "What's wrong, Jake?" My husband called Jake, and when I looked over, Jake was shaking with his phone in his hand. I then looked at the phone Jake was holding, and there the screen displayed Laura with an incoming call. Jake seemed to be having a reflex of rejection. He couldn't answer the phone. So with Jake's permission, I answered the call. Hello? Oh? Why are you answering the phone? Jake is not feeling well today, so I picked up the phone for him. I see. In that case, I'm worried. So please, let us visit while we have our discussion. We're outside your house right now. I'm sorry. We're actually out at the moment. That's strange. If Jake's phone is there, but you're not home, how does that work? I'm not used to lying, and my lie was easily exposed. Isabella, there's no need to be so cautious. My parents and I are here to have a discussion with you. As she spoke, my husband moved towards the door. It won't help running away from this situation. Might as well settle it now, my curt husband said, opening the front door and welcoming Laura and her parents into our house. Their faces as they entered lacked any hint of a smile. In fact, it seemed as if they were glaring at us. We apologize for the sudden visit. We just heard something from our daughter and thought we should join the conversation. It was probably about something I'd said to Laura the other day. I had suggested we should have a discussion involving both our sets of parents. I hadn't expected them to come unannounced, though. In the tense atmosphere, the discussion began. We explained that Jake had asked Laura to manage their money, but due to her excessive frugality, he had suffered health issues and had not been provided with adequate meals. We also told them that he was currently under medical treatment. However, it seemed that Laura and her parents were convinced by this fact. That's all about Jake's situation. Is there anything you'd like to say? Laura's mother chimed in. But wasn't Jake the one who asked Laura to manage the money? Doesn't he bear some responsibility then? Of course, you're right. If Jake had managed it himself, we wouldn't have this issue. But don't you think surviving on instant noodles for all meals is a bit much? That's none of our business. Maybe it couldn't be helped in order to save money. Is that true, Laura? Yes, it is. I never waste money, but Jake often buys a lot of unnecessary things. What? I didn't buy anything. Stop lying, Jake. She laughed. What? So it was a lie. Just like he tried to pretend he wasn't home today. Like father, like son, I guess. What? Before we knew it, instead of a discussion, it had turned into a situation where Jake and I were being cornered. Every time Jake and I tried to argue, Laura and her parents would shut us down with another point. It seemed our opinions were not being heard, only their one-sided claims continued. Just then, my usually quiet husband, who had been silent until now, slammed the table. At the sound and his sudden action, everyone jumped in surprise. Can I say something? Laura, are you and your parents trying to say that it's all Jake's fault? I'm not saying that. I just think that if they are a couple, then they should lay everything out on the table and have a good, honest discussion. Then they might be able to get along again. Lay everything out. I see. I understand. You might be right. What? I'll talk to Jake again here. So, would you be willing to set up another discussion on a different day? I think everything will be clear by then. It seems you're a reasonable man, sir. All right. I apologize for my previous rudeness. How about 2 weeks from today for the next meeting? I don't think it's good to leave it too long. Sounds good. That will be sufficient. And so it was decided that the meeting would take place at a later date, as my husband had suggested. After the three of them had left, I turned on my husband furiously. Why would you say such a thing? It's as if you're admitting that Jake is in the wrong. Calm down. I didn't think Jake was at fault, nor did I particularly want to smooth things over. Then why? Don't you find it strange? Why go to such lengths to make up with Jake? Huh? She brought her parents with their complaints, all with the aim of reconciliation. In a situation like this, I wouldn't even consider reconciliation. He had a point. If they cared about their daughter, they would either discuss divorce or approach the situation more calmly. Perhaps there was another objective. As I pieced together the situation, I realized one thing. What makes Jake so essential to Laura and her parents? The first thing that came to mind was money. From what Jake had shared, he had a pretty decent salary. However, he couldn't go against Laura, so he wasn't able to get allowances or such. In that case, Laura and her parents might be depending on Jake's money. But recently, he had switched to disability benefits and had a separate account for his salary. If that's the case, they must be in trouble. Perhaps they made contact because they wanted Jake to come home quickly and secure his salary. After discussing with my husband, we reached that conclusion and immediately told Jake. Jake, if this continues, you'll be drained by that family. I think it's better to make a decision before that happens. I'm sorry, but this is something only you can decide. So think it over carefully. I understand. It was a hard decision, but Jake also had to move forward. Making decisions for oneself is crucial. About a week later, Jake came to a conclusion. Mom, Dad, I'm getting a divorce. My husband and I embraced Jake, honoring his decision and the courage it took. It wasn't an easy thing to do. He must have thought about various things. Whether this is the right decision or not, we don't know. But we will understand as we continue to live. At least, I thought it was a good decision. Then, we started helping Jake prepare for the divorce. We had to push the meeting back a little because it didn't seem like we would make it in 2 weeks. So, we told Laura's family. They made some snide remarks, but knowing that this relationship would soon be over made it bearable. Once everything was ready, we sat and waited for their call. Then, Laura and her father came to our house right away. What's this all about? I didn't hear anything about a divorce mediation. So, this is why you wanted to postpone the meeting. What a joke. Let me tell you, I'm not attending any of this mediation. My daughter will never get a divorce. Laura and her father were furious. It was a natural reaction since they thought there would be no divorce. But the wheels were already in motion. There was no stopping it now. Please, calm down, both of you. Our decision to divorce will not change. Please, leave now. You! Could you please stop? Besides, didn't you say you were going to lay everything out in the open? You're hiding something from us, aren't you? Like how you're taking Jake's money through your daughter. What are you talking about? Stop the poor excuses. We have all the information. It was a bit costly, but we had a detective investigate you. You quit your job last year, didn't you? You're living a pretty comfortable life, aren't you? Taking it easy with a job and living on Jake's money. You have your retirement savings, and there's no problem as long as you keep leeching off Jake. I'm sorry. Then my husband lost his temper. What good does apologizing do now? You've been using the money Jake earned through hard work for your leisure. There's no way I'd ever accept your apology. Laura, you too. If you wanted to help your father after he quit his job, why didn't you use your own money? Using someone else's money for that. Are you some kind of fraudster? Just get out. I don't want to breathe the same air as you for even a moment. Just get lost! With my husband's roar, Laura and her father quickly left. At that moment, it became clear that my husband was the angriest about this whole matter. And so, this incident came to a close. In the mediation that followed, we hired a lawyer and successfully got the divorce. Although not for the full amount, some repayment obligation was established, and Laura's family was ordered to pay. After the divorce was finalized, Laura and her father immediately started looking for full-time jobs. Due to his age, it seems like he is having a hard time finding work. Laura is balancing a day job and a night job, literally working without a break. Since then, Jake's condition has improved and he's returned to work. I was torn about how much I should help this time, but I now think it was good that I did. I want my child to be healthy after all. I don't know what the future holds, but I want Jake to know that he always has 2 allies.
Do you truly cherish your family? Don't you take them for granted just because they're always there? What I'm about to share is my own real-life experience. I'm Donna Hernandez, 45 years old. I want to share a story from the time in my life when I most profoundly pondered on family dynamics, what a healthy family looks like. This takes us back about 15 years when I was working as a magazine editor. My life was consumed entirely by work. In the field of editing, there's hardly any time for dating. Despite this, everyone tried to make the most of their precious 30s, carving out time for blind dates and other outings. It was a slightly more relaxed era, security-wise too, so meeting up with your date in between work was quite common. However, I wasn't good at making time for myself, or for leisure. Work was always my priority, and dating always ended up being pushed back to the bottom of my list. This made me a bad partner. The person who still showed interest in me, despite all this, was my dear, understanding husband, Stephen. He was an editor at the same company. We worked on different magazines and never really interacted directly, but we both often worked late, so we would see each other pretty often on the same elevator after work. This served as a bridge between us. Both of us were proud of our work and didn't want dating to interfere, so we were quite similar in that regard. Sometimes we'd even passionately discuss the future of magazines as comrades in arms. Because of the decidedly unromantic nature of our relationship, it took us some time to become a couple. Now that we're married, however, there's no one who understands me better than he does. He's my invaluable partner. My husband was the one who suggested we split household chores to ensure we both continue working effectively. We didn't adopt a rotation system, but rather whoever noticed something that needed doing, or whoever was available, would do it. This approach left us both stress-free. We were a couple who could talk about anything, and our relationship was almost like a friendship. One day, my husband got a call from his father. His mother had fractured her dominant hand and wanted us to help with household chores until she healed, even if that meant living with them. I was puzzled at this point. My husband's parents lived with his younger brother. There were 2 adults in the house. Surely they wouldn't need us to move in to help. I instinctively asked my husband, "Do they really need help?" My husband was also confused, saying, "That's exactly what I said, but they insist they can't manage without help. I can't believe it." The relationship between my husband and his younger brother was strained, and as a result, my husband kept his distance from his family home. His younger brother had a habit of job hopping and never held down a job for more than a year. He seemed to be unemployed at the moment. He claims he's making money playing slot machines, seeing gambling as a legitimate job, which is just absurd. My brother had once referred him to a job through his connections, but his brother had run off without even notifying his boss, forcing my husband to apologize to them on his behalf. But their father never reprimanded the brother. Whenever their mother tried to scold him, their father would always intervene, in a rather overprotective manner. I kept silent about my husband's family matters, but my husband naturally sided with his mother. But in the end, his father and brother's attitudes didn't change. From that point on, my husband became distant from his family, saying, "I get irritated when I see my dad and brother." Distant meant he wouldn't visit the house, but he made sure to stay in contact with his mother and father. He seemed to want to cut ties with his father as well, but he couldn't, since he was the only one to contact in case anything happened to his mother. Amid this, the SOS call was from his father, not his injured mother. His father didn't work after retirement either, so despite having 2 men at home with plenty of free time, they still needed our help. I had a bad feeling, but had no idea what the situation was. "I guess we have to go," my husband said with a sigh. Right now, my husband is involved in the correlation of a new magazine, and is an important member of the project. The magazine was a children's magazine, something my husband had dreamed of for many years. He surely wants to devote all his strength to work. On the other hand, due to a major reorganization in the magazine I was involved in, I was in a situation where I could easily take a substantial break. Those who can, do what they can do. That's our family motto, isn't it? Take good care of this house. When I said this with a smile, my husband reluctantly said, "I'll go, because I might make you have a hard time with my family issues." But in the end, seeing my eager self, he finally gave in and bowed his head. "It's all right. Whatever happens, I'll face it." Thus, I went to help with the housework in my husband's place. "Thank you for coming, Donna. I know you're busy with your work. I'm sorry." With her head bowed apologetically, my mother-in-law welcomed me. She had a cast on her hand. Even now, after aging, my mother-in-law was still actively working on the front lines as an insurance saleswoman. Her figure in a cast looked strangely pitiful. For the time being, I asked her about the general things, like what I should do, meal times, etc. That's when it happened. "Hey, I'm going to work, so give me some money." The person who came stomping was my brother-in-law, who had grown considerably. He was much larger than the last time I saw him. He was so arrogant that I thought I'd give him an honorary sir. And what does he mean by give me money because I'm going to work? He's just going to the casino, isn't he? If he says it's work, how about not taking any money and earning some? "Again, I don't have money, so you should stay at home." My mother-in-law raises her voice. I thought that's right. That's right. "Shut up. Want me to cause a scene?" my brother-in-law said. At this, my mother-in-law shrinks for a moment and went to get her wallet in silence. She takes out $200 and hands it to her son. "Thanks." My brother-in-law flutters the bills and goes out the front door. Wait, is it okay to give that to him? I was taken aback. Even if that goofball threw a fit, we could easily shun him down, can't we? That's what I thought, but I noticed my mother trembling in fear. Mother-in-law, was it okay to give him the money? When I asked, my mother-in-law looked down and silently nodded. I wasn't satisfied. It made no sense. Just 30 minutes in, I already wanted to tattle to my husband, but I had to resist because he was in the middle of his work. I'm short-tempered. If it were me being asked for money, I'd have lost my temper and lashed out at him. However, since my mother-in-law didn't retort, I decided to keep my mouth shut for the moment. At the same time, I thought I might need to keep a close eye on this household. But that was the only issue, and the day ended. I was wondering, is my brother-in-law the only problem? The next day, I accompanied my mother-in-law to the hospital. We did make an appointment, but it was crowded, so we got home later than planned. My father-in-law was there to welcome us back home. I had expected a warm welcome back, but instead, I was scolded immediately. "You haven't prepared the bathtub yet?" And it was only 3 in the afternoon. Apparently, my father-in-law had been sweating and wanted to take a bath right away and was angry that the bathtub hadn't been cleaned. I almost told him, "You could clean it yourself," but I decided to hold my tongue for now, seeing that my mother-in-law wasn't saying anything. But then, I see my mother-in-law about to apologize and head for the bathroom. No, you can't be cleaning the bathroom, you're injured." I hurriedly stopped her and took over the cleaning duties. When the cleaning was done, I went to check on my mother-in-law. I assumed she would be taking it easy after the hospital visit, but instead, she was already starting her dinner preparations. I offered to help, and my father-in-law laughed and said, "Well, that's great. This will speed things up." He got on my nerves, and I accidentally glared at him. I was worried that I had made a mistake. But it turns out my father-in-law wasn't paying me any mind, engrossed in the TV on his couch. To top it all off, he casually asked me to give him a shoulder rub later. I couldn't believe he could make such a request, looking at my mother-in-law's bandaged hand. That night, dinner tasted bland, perhaps due to my seething anger. My brother-in-law complained about the food being basic, and my father-in-law demanded my injured mother-in-law to serve his drink. I wanted to give them a piece of my mind, but I had to consider my mother-in-law's feelings. In just 2 days, I had come to understand the lowly position of my mother-in-law in this household. I couldn't believe how different things were from the last time I visited this house. Once my mother-in-law and I were alone, "Why don't you ever speak up for yourself?" I couldn't help but ask her. "Well, isn't this how it is in every household?" "Which household? It's certainly not like this in our house," I retorted, and my mother-in-law looked taken aback. According to her, when she had complained about the situation at work, her colleagues had just laughed it off, saying things like, "That's just how it is everywhere. The wife is always working her tail off." She had given up, thinking if that's what everyone else was enduring, then it must be unavoidable. "Oh, please, mother-in-law, just because other families have their own customs doesn't mean it's not strange. And don't normalize what you feel is weird just because it's common elsewhere." As I tried to persuade her, my mother-in-law murmured, seemingly deep in thought, "Yeah, you're right." Apparently, since her husband retired a year ago, things had taken a turn. At first, it was just tolerable things that you'd expect in any household, like him asking, "Is dinner ready yet?" Even the idea of the husband not doing chores while at home seemed like a fairly universal issue. So she had put up with the mounting stress, thinking it was something unavoidable. But gradually, my father-in-law's complaints increased. If my mother-in-law didn't prepare his meals on time, or didn't cook what he wanted, he would start complaining. To make things go his way, he wouldn't hesitate to use dubious arguments like, "The doctor said that simple meals have too much salt. It's a no-go." Of course, no doctor had ever said anything like that, and he seemed to forget his own argument the next day, asking for more seasoned food. My mother-in-law was tossed around by his whims, getting scolded for making food too salty one day and too bland the next. Naturally, she couldn't keep up with these unreasonable demands. As a result, my father-in-law began to look down on her as a woman who couldn't do chores or cleaning to his standard. Seeing this, her son also started to look down on his mother, joining his father in their criticism, apparently out of resentment from being scolded himself before. Not only did he voice his complaints along with his father, he also began to demand money, sinking to a new low. My mother-in-law couldn't ignore this behavior and scolded him, asserting that what he was doing wasn't right. But then her son, who had been losing money playing slot machines, lashed out at her one day when she tried to give him a talk. As a result, she ended up with an injury above her eyebrow where he had thrown the TV remote at her. It wasn't intentional, more of an accident in the process of trying to get her out of the room. I am sure that if I had been there, I would have at least thrown a chair back at him. But my mother-in-law is not that kind of person. It was enough of an incident to make her take a softer approach towards her son, out of fear of things escalating further. Knowing this, her son started to threaten to cause a scene if his whims were not indulged. I couldn't help but think what a terrible person he had become. In the end, despite having 3 adults in the house, the only one doing any work or chores was my mother-in-law. 2 men were leeching off of her, and yet had the audacity to act high and mighty. "Mom, if things get too tough, you can always come to our place. Let's stand up and say no to things we can't accept. Upon hearing my words, my mother-in-law looked down with a complicated expression on her face. You're right. It's reassuring to know that this isn't normal. I thought I was just being overly sensitive. After saying that, she smiled and ended the conversation with, Let's get some sleep for today. I wondered if I had overstepped my boundaries. But I don't think I was wrong. I decided that I would do everything I could to help my mother-in-law if something were to happen. The next morning, it seemed like the weather and the atmospheric pressure were affecting my mother-in-law's health, not just her hands. I had just decided to give her all the support I could to make sure she didn't push herself. Her son came down from upstairs saying, Mom, take me to the casino. I inadvertently said, What? But he didn't seem to notice. Hey, the newspaper isn't here. Hurry up and get it from the mailbox. Even my father-in-law chimed in. He could have gone to the nearby mailbox himself. I shot him a glare, but of course, he just stayed seated on the couch. That object moves only when prompted by a physiological phenomenon. I wonder if it's supposed to be some sort of feature of this house. My mother-in-law stayed silent as I trembled with anger. Usually she would start her work after uttering yes or some other word of affirmation. Does her silence and lack of motion mean that yesterday's persuasion worked? As I watched anxiously, my father-in-law impatiently said, Are you done yet? Hurry up. Even my brother-in-law started saying things like, We are waiting and ready. Why is silence interpreted as an okay in this house? Gosh, I can't stand this. Just as I reached the end of my tether and was about to lash out on these deadbeat men, I absolutely won't do it. It was my mother-in-law who shouted. Both my father-in-law and brother-in-law were surprised, as it was the loudest she's ever yelled. Just do whatever you want. I'm not fond of your demands anymore. Well said. I felt an urge to dance with joy. Good for you, mother-in-law. That's amazing. As I was secretly cheering her on, my father-in-law let out a big sigh. Ha! All talk and no work. It's fine. Go ahead and leave. Go on. Leave. Only at times like these does he look at me from his couch with a grin. That's right, Mom. You should leave. My brother-in-law was laughing as well. You all, fine. Just as I was about to yell, it was my mother-in-law who calmly agreed to leave. Well then, I'll go. Let's leave together, Donna. I felt a sudden lift in my mood. Mother-in-law, you've made a decision. I answered with an uncontrollable smile, yes, and immediately called a taxi to leave the house with my mother-in-law. I need to take her home before she changes her mind. Once we got home and she got some rest, I called my husband to inform him about all that happened. I actually hadn't told him about the events from the past 2 days yet. I'd been so prepared to dash out at the slightest sign of trouble that I'd forgotten to consult him for support. My husband finished his work super early that day after I explained the situation. Oh my, isn't my husband just too competent? And then the three of us thought about what to do next. My awakened mother-in-law was ruthless. Let's make their lives miserable, she declared with a smile. She's usually so gentle, but she's a skilled insurance agent after all. It's just how it is. That's what she made herself believe for so long to put up with their nonsense. I truly sympathized for her. But if she could tolerate such things for a whole year, she must be really strong-willed. I won't go back until they come begging, my mother-in-law loudly declared. The next day, my mother-in-law canceled both of their cell phone plans and drained the bank account where the utility bills were auto-deducted. We thought they might realize something was wrong as soon as their phones stopped working and come begging. But both my mother-in-law and husband disagreed. After all, neither my father-in-law nor my brother-in-law had ever paid a bill themselves, so they didn't understand how the system worked. To make matters worse, neither of them worked, so it wasn't like they were expecting calls from anyone. This was still the era of flip phones. And these two didn't use the internet much, so they rarely touched their phones. They probably won't even notice and will just think they have bad service. My husband and mother-in-law laughed. As for the utilities, my mother-in-law chuckled, saying, "They don't even know the bills are auto-deducted, so they'll definitely end up having their bills piled up." Who knew these monsters couldn't handle basic household chores, let alone life? On a side note, unfortunately, there seems to be a bit of money left in the house for living expenses. Apparently, it's enough to last about 3 months for food, assuming my brother-in-law doesn't spend it all in slot machines. A month and a half passed since then.
Bro, please. You've got Mom there, right? Tell her to pay the bills. We can't survive the summer without AC.
This pitiful call, half sobbing, was from my brother-in-law to my husband. He had to go out and find a payphone because his cell service had been cut. It was summertime. The weather wasn't as scorching as it is these days, but it was clear that their electricity had been cut. Normally, they should have realized something was wrong when they received overdue bills, but just as my mother-in-law had predicted, they hadn't noticed. They woke up in the morning because of the heat and found out that none of the lights were working. When they frantically contacted the power company, they were told that they hadn't paid their bills. By the way, my husband received this call and hung up right after hearing what my brother-in-law had to say. My husband, he can be quite ruthless. That's one of the things I love about him. They tried to call our house too, but we saw the number and didn't pick up. It was my mother-in-law's orders. Another half a month passed. 2 months had passed since the beginning of my mother-in-law's revenge. When I came home from work, my brother-in-law and father-in-law were sobbing in front of our house.
Sis, please, let us see Mom. The water has been shut off. Donna, I beg you to. The toilet. The toilet won't flush.
Hearing them, I struggled to hold back my laughter. They were so desperate, it was ridiculous. I wonder if they were aware of it. Anyway, it was inconvenient having them hang around at our doorstep, so I decided to talk to my mother-in-law about it. She decided to meet them and showed her face in front of the two of them. My husband came home just in time, so we all decided to have a talk inside the house. "What are you two deadbeats who don't know anything about the real world doing here?" My mother-in-law spoke. The two of them couldn't look at my mother-in-law in the face and were bowing, even though they were sitting at the table.
We can't do this anymore. We're sorry. Please come back,"
my brother-in-law said, hanging his head low. My father-in-law followed suit. "I'm also at my wits' end having to look at you two, but I wonder what I should do in that case." My mother-in-law glanced at me with a playful grin. Indeed, what should we do, I wonder? Following her lead, I also chimed in with a smile.
"Why don't you just stay here forever, Mom?"
Then my husband chimed in, grinning. "Exactly. Going back would just mean babysitting 2 jobless grown men again. I would hate that." The moment my mother-in-law uttered those words,
"Whoa! I'll start working. I'll work,"
my brother-in-law cried out. But we all noticed the moment his face twisted into a confused wait. Probably all work was just a spur-of-the-moment lie. But this was a golden opportunity.
"If that's the case, write a pledge right here and now that you will work your fingers to the bone from now on." "Huh?"
My husband quickly prepared paper and a pen, handing them to my brother-in-law, who was completely being swept away by our pace. Here, right here. Write that from now on, you will live entirely on your own money and provide for Mom. Swept along by my husband, my brother-in-law found himself writing the pledge before he knew what was happening. His face grew paler by the second. If you break this, you'll have to give all your assets to Mom. Got it? My husband's words carried no legal binding, but there was a strong, intimidating force that told you he would make you stick through the agreement no matter what. My brother-in-law replied with a small voice. Understood. And you too, Dad, my mother-in-law said. Don't think I'm going back just because he's working. If you don't change, it won't change the fact that I have a jobless grown child to deal with. I have nothing to do with this, my father-in-law quickly defended. Huh, is that so? Then we'll have you leave that house, Dad. Would that be fine, Mom? When my husband said that, my mother-in-law chuckled wickedly. That's not enough. What else can we get out of him? Why not sell those fancy watches and stuff that Dad cherishes? Oh, that's a good idea. Let's do that. And then? The moment my husband and mother-in-law began picking out a list of things to sell, my father-in-law slammed the table and stood up. I got it. I'll do anything. Just please come back. As he finished his words, he hung his head down, defeated. Anything you say. What exactly will you do? At my mother-in-law's words, my father-in-law let out a squeal. He was clearly terrified by the atmosphere and afraid of her. I'll help with the household chores and clean. That's the absolute minimum, Dad. You're living in that house, too. It's odd to think of helping out as doing someone else a favor. You're just taking care after yourself. Understand that, and stop being cocky. My husband said, clearly exasperated. All the housework? Okay. Yes, my father-in-law answered weakly. Well, he is unemployed. Even with all the housework, it's not nearly enough. My husband added, with his eyes turning red. My father-in-law responded, I'll do anything I can. I believe he felt both shame and frustration, feelings likely stemming from being told off by his own son. And so the drama ended with my mother-in-law agreeing to return home on the condition that all her demands were met. Fast forward 10 years. My brother-in-law faced many job rejections, but he managed to land a part-time job at a diner, which he used to talk about when he was a kid. He was surrounded by younger colleagues and went through some rough patches, being worn out by the workload. However, realizing that no other workplaces would hire him due to his long history of unemployment, he continued to work with newfound determination. His hard work paid off, and he was hired as a full-time employee 5 years later. Last year, he even got promoted to the position of store manager. A late bloomer, I guess. My mother-in-law, realizing that she couldn't handle the physically demanding job of an insurance saleswoman anymore, has now become a full-time housewife. As per the agreement from that time, my father-in-law does all the housework. He's found joy in it. Recently, he's so engrossed in cooking that he's been serving French cuisine at home. It's delicious, and we often enjoy his culinary treats. There have been changes in our lives, too. My husband has been promoted to the editor-in-chief. I knew he would make it. His dream of running a successful children's magazine led to an extraordinary fast-track promotion. Now, I'm the wife of an editor-in-chief. But I'm still just an editor. This is because my focus shifted to our kids due to consecutive maternity leaves. I'm now a mom to 3 boys and 1 girl. Every day is a whirlwind, but I found that prioritizing my kids over work brings more joy. Thanks to my mother-in-law and father-in-law occasionally taking care of the kids, it hasn't been too overwhelming despite having a large family. This isn't because we ask them to. They simply help out when they can. In a family, whoever can does what they can, regardless of gender roles. No one has to sacrifice themselves for everybody. I believe that's the most effortless and natural way to achieve happiness in a family. Each person is not just mom or dad, but an individual of their own. I plan to continue cherishing my family with all my might. I hope you also pay close attention to your family, ensuring no one is struggling or sacrificing for others, because I believe that's the shortcut to long-lasting happiness.